Shalom Alechem, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to be learning about Chanukah. Chanukah. Now, a lot of people may think that Hanukkah is just some sort of Christmas substitute, or something to do with candles. Something to do with candles and presents, and fried food and celebration, and something good happened. And maybe some oil lasted 8 days or something. But what a lot of people may not know is, it's a very interesting story. So, according to the book of First Maccabees, which is considered holy and divinely inspired scripture of some kind by Catholics and Orthodox Christians, but not thoroughly recognized in some way by Jews and Christians. But nonetheless, it is recognized by Jews, but it's not in the Tanakh. But at any rate, the story of Chanukah is that the Greeks, well, really, it's a very martial story. A lot of the stories in the Bible they have to do with warfare in a very real way. As we shall see, these stories which teach us these wonderful spiritual lessons, they have to do with a very powerful soul. And in a very kind of politically transformational sense. In terms of actual physical combat. So basically the Greeks had taken over Jerusalem. The Greeks, and they were enslaving the Jewish people, and it's not good. He was taxing them, and they went, and after they conquered Egypt, starting in verse 20, in the 143rd year, Antiochus turned and went up to Israel and Jerusalem with a loud army. He entered the sanctuary in arrogance and took the golden altar, the lampstand, all the utensils, and the table of faces, the cups and bowls, and the golden censers, and the curtain, and at the face of the temple. Golden ornaments, crowns, he stripped everything, took the silver and the gold, and everything costly, and the hidden treasure he found, because there were tunnels underneath. Everybody knows about that. Okay, taking all these things, he departed and went to his own land, and he committed deeds of murder and spoke with great arrogance. More destruction of Jerusalem. And then they put out an edict. So skipping over to verse 41, the king wrote to all of his kingdom that all the people were to be as one people, which really means to say that we need an assimilation of the overly zealous religious people, or really just the religiously devoted. These religious people, as so often secular society would like us to have happen, they want us to assimilate and to be like them. But the believers, the true believers of God, throughout all of the Bible and throughout all of time, there were always strangers in a strange land. Abraham, Moses. Physically, in a certain sense, they were strangers in a strange land, but also metaphysically. And so one of the things that the king of the Greeks wants to do is he wants everyone to be the same secular society where we're devoted to money and business, which he soon will promise them. He tries to bribe them, and then he just kills them. But if they don't listen, so it starts off with a monetary incentive, but with the help of God, it escalates quickly. And many from Israel also thought it was good to serve him. And so they sacrificed to the idols and profaned the Sabbath. They stopped keeping the Sabbath and they started just living as a Greek and not keeping the Torah. Then the king sent books to Jerusalem, and the cities of Judah by the hand of his messengers and told them to follow foreign customs in the land. Enough with all this tradition. Um, and he, in the Torah, the real covenant of God, to forbid whole burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary and to profane the Sabbaths and the feasts, defile the sanctuary and the holy ones. These books also told them to build altars, sacred precincts, and temples to idols, to sacrifice pigs and common animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised so they would corrupt their souls, by every unclean and profane thing, and forget the Torah, and alter all the ordinances. They also added that whoever did not obey the word of the king would die. So, a cherry on top to end with. And it was on the 15th day of Kislev in the 145th year that they set up the abomination of desolation on the altar of whole burnt offerings, where I believe they sacrificed a pig. Or it could have been a statue. But they could have sacrificed a pig on the altar. And they also burned incense at the doors of the houses, and they just said, listen, it's no longer the God of Israel in Jerusalem. And they destroyed the sanctuary and they destroyed the temple of God. And they said, it's time to study philosophy. it's time to be Greek. It's time to be like us. We conquered you, and so you are no longer allowed to practice your religion. And y'all are kind of dangerous. And so, it'd be nice if y'all were less devoted to your sacred principles and more liberal in your understanding of morality and truth. And so and then he set up people to watch the Jews all over the place. Yep. And then on the 25th day of the month, they sacrificed on the altar, which was on top, in keeping with the decree. They sentenced to death the woman who had their children circumcised and the families who had circumcised them, and hung the infants from their mothers' necks. So they committed very serious war crimes against the soul, almost like crucifixion scale atrocities. And yet many in Israel grew strong and determined in themselves not to eat unclean things. It's so interesting that this is in the Christian Bible. I mean, it's recognized as sacred scripture because the story is very interesting. They're very devoted to the Torah. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that Jesus, Yeshua, he did celebrate the festival of Hanukah. He did celebrate the festival of Hanukkah according to the New Testament. And that's not disputed, I don't believe, even by Orthodox Christians. They actually recognize that fact and agree. And so it is interesting, even for people who love Yeshua, Jesus, his name was Yeshua, if they love him, it's very interesting. I mean, it seems like there's a clear precedent for keeping Hanukkah, considering the fact that Yeshua himself kept it. Maybe I wonder, what is the teaching of Hanukkah? Because a lot of times people just celebrate festivals and they're excited about the smells and the pumpkin spice and everything nice and the hot chocolates and the presents and the family gatherings. which is very nice. It's very nice. But in the Bible, a lot of the festivals, they really all signify and are bringing us to a state of remembrance about very sacred principles and events and specific teachings. And so the reason for the season is something to very much contemplate, especially when it comes to something like Hanukkah. Because as we're going to see, the story, although it begins very bad, thank God for a few holy men who said enough is enough. And Mattisyahu, the son, starting in chapter 2, the son of John, of the tribe of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Yarib, rose up from Jerusalem and settled in Modin. He had 5 sons: John, called Gadai; Simon, called Thasi; Judas, called Maccabeus; Eleazar, called Avran; and Jonathan, called Apaphus. And he saw the blasphemies taking place in Judah and Jerusalem, and he said, "Why are we alive?" He said, "Mamash, what the F are we doing? What, our people are dying. We're taxed to oblivion. The temple's been destroyed. We are completely enslaved, and we can't even keep the Torah. So why are we alive? Why are we alive in a very real sense? Are we alive to just make money and die? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we're buried. Why are we alive, my sons? Why are we alive, my sons?" And he basically elaborates that for the next 8 verses. And then now comes the big moment, because at verse 15 in chapter 2, this is the book of First Maccabees, it says, "Now those from the king who were enforcing the apostasy journeyed to the city of Modin to make them offer sacrifices, that is, to the Greek gods, and to make sure people are listening to the king's order. So Mattisyahu and his sons gathered together. Then those from the king spoke to Mattisyahu, and they said, 'You are a great and glorious leader in this city, and supported by your sons and brothers. Now come, be the first to follow the decree of the king, as all the Gentiles and the men of Judah have done, and those who remain in Jerusalem. And you and your sons will be among the king's friends, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many rewards.'" Incidentally, on a side note, the word Gentile, people, especially modern-day anti-Zionist Christians, believe that the word goy, they're very confused about the word goy. They think the Jewish people are called goy in the Torah. They're called a goy kadosh, a holy nation. And so sometimes goyim, I'm a goy, I wasn't born Jewish, but people who are of the nations, we can forget that in the language, the word goy, it means nation. It doesn't mean cattle or some sort of racist slur. Now, it is sometimes used that way, but it doesn't mean that. At any rate, side note, and it's unfortunate, but Mattisyahu, he's basically put on the stage, and he has this moment where if he doesn't do the sacrifice, he will be killed, him and his sons. But if he does the sacrifice and rejects the Torah of Moses, then he'll be given silver and gold and many rewards for assimilating into this culture. If you don't have mezuzahs on your door, maybe we can get you a home in downtown Athens. We'd love to hear about your interpretation of things. Just lighten up, lighten up. Don't be so strict all the time, and devoted and exclusive in your very serious covenant relationship with God. At any rate, Mattisyahu defies him and says, "Though all the Gentiles in the house of the kingdom obey him, and each one turns from the worship of their fathers and chooses to follow his commands, my sons and my brothers, I will continue in the covenant of our fathers. Far be it from us to forsake the Torah and the ordinances. We will not obey the words of the king. So, kind of a very serious approach. When he finished saying these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of everyone to sacrifice upon the altar in Modin in accordance with the king's decree. When Mattisyahu saw him, he was filled with zeal and his heart trembled and poured forth anger and judgment. Then he ran and slew that man. He killed that Jewish person upon the altar. So he killed the king's man who wanted to offer a sacrifice at that time, and he tore down the altar. Thus he had zeal for the Torah, just like Pinchas had against Zimri, the son of Salmon. And then he flees to the mountains. Shortly thereafter, he amasses a serious number of individuals who are ready to fight. Starting in verse 42, then the synagogue of the Hashmodeans gathered with them a mighty army from Israel. Everyone who willingly offered himself from evils was added to them and became their support. So they formed an army, and they struck the sinners in their wrath, and the lawless men in their anger. The rest fled to the Gentiles to be rescued. Mattisyahu and his allies also surrounded the altars and tore them down, and they circumcised all of the uncircumcised boys by force, as many as they found in all basically of Israel. Thus they pursued the sons of arrogance, and the undertaking prospered in their hand. They took the law out of the hand of the Gentiles and the kings and did not allow the sinners to dominate them. Basically, it was a 1776 moment where, in great zeal and love for the truth of God, these holy soldiers, they said, we have a tyrannical, secular government that is oppressing us, and we will hold to our sacred principles and we will fight for the truth, because it's better, as the saying goes, to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And so the Greeks are not happy, as you can imagine, with all this warfare and this little uprising, which is quickly escalating. The Greeks are not happy, and they start fighting them. But then the Jews start winning even stronger and stronger and stronger, and they start winning a lot of military battles with thousands of soldiers on both sides going to war, killing each other. And for territorial sovereignty, or sovereignty over this territory of Jerusalem, to boom, establish a government and say, this is our land. It's very serious. These Jews, they said, Mamash, I don't know who you are or where you think you came from, but this is Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem. I've been to the land of Jerusalem, land of Israel, and been to that holy place 3 times, 3 separate times on 3 separate trips. Multiple times on 3 separate trips, but the sanctity of that place, it would be wonderful to live there. Well, it would be wonderful to live there if it wasn't a war zone. I mean, it is a war zone, and everyone's walking around with M16s. Thank you, God. And when I was there, a riot broke out with thousands of people, and people are screaming and shooting tear gas, and people, they're just mobbing each other in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, like mamash on the mountain. And and there's cars driving by, and it's kind of just how they live there. They are fighters. They are always fighting over there. But at any rate, the Jews gain in power and in confidence, and they take back Jerusalem fully and the Temple Mount. And they restore the temple. And then after Mattisyahu dies, he appoints Judah. And then Judah and his brothers with him, they defeat a very large contingent of soldiers. I think like 110,000. It was like 50,000 and then 60,000. At any rate, behold, our foes have been crushed. Chapter 436. Behold, our foes have been crushed, and let us go to purify the sanctuary and renew it. Thus the entire camp gathered and now ascended to Mount Zion. They saw there the sanctuary deserted, the altar desecrated, the doors burned down. In the courtyard they found that bushes had grown up as in a wooded area or on one on the mountains. It's just completely left in ruins. They also saw that the priests' quarters were left in ruins. So they tore their garments and lamented greatly and sprinkled themselves with ashes. They fell on their faces on the earth, sounded the signal on the trumpets, and cried to heaven. And then Judah ordered his men to fight everyone remaining in the citadel until he purified the entire sanctuary. He chose righteous priests devoted to the Torah. They purified the sanctuary and carried the defiled stones. Well, and then they get in a little bit of a halakhic situation. And they're like, listen, we need a prophet to come. And so we're going to put all these stones over here and we're going to make a new altar. And so then they took uncut stones according to the Torah and constructed a new altar like the one before. Verse 48, they also repaired the sanctuary and inside the temple, consecrated the courtyards, made new vessels, carried the lampstand back, the menorah, the altar of incense, and the table of faces into the temple. And then they burnt incense on the altar and lit the menorah. And these gave light inside the temple. Then they set bread on the table, hung the curtains, and completed all the tasks they had begun. Then they arose early on the morning of the 25th day on the 9th month, the 25th, which is in the month of Kislev, and offered sacrifices according to the Torah on the new altar of whole burnt offerings which they made, and it was consecrated with songs, harps, lutes, and cymbals, maybe drums, at that time. And on the day, it was on that day, exact day that the Gentiles had previously desecrated it, the 25th. All the people fell down and worshipped and blessed heaven, which had prospered them. They celebrated the consecration of the altar for 8 days. Boom. And they had wonderful sacrifices, and they did so with gladness. They also beautified the temple with gold. Excuse me, verse 59. Then Judah and his brothers and the congregation of Israel decided that each year at that time, the days of the consecration of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 full days, beginning on the 25th of the month of Kislev. So that's the reason for the season. These wonderfully powerful, these practitioners of unconventional warfare, and they overthrew a government. They overthrew a government and said, this is Jerusalem, and we will live by the Torah, and we will live by the truth of the living God of all the worlds and the covenant that he has made with us. And so specifically the 8 days of Hanukkah are the 8 days of the consecration of the altar, which they just made a new altar, and then they celebrated the consecration of the altar for 8 days, and they offered whole burnt offerings with gladness and the sacrifice of peace offerings and the thank offerings. So we're really specifically celebrating the reinitiation of the sacrificial system in the Torah. We're very excited and very happy that the animal sacrificial system has been reinitiated. That is mamash in the Bible. And I don't read this when I'm studying the Tanakh because you have to have the Hebrew, of course. But which is, really interesting. A lot of people don't know this about the wisdom of Sirach. I really like to emphasize this point whenever I speak about the truth of God, that it really is significant what language you're using to understand what's been revealed. And it's interesting because I was just reading this again in the wisdom of Sirach. Side note, the wisdom of Sirach, his name was Jesus. Why don't we call him Jesus? His name's Yeshua ben Sirach. Yeshua ben Sirach. I don't know. It's just a coincidence that this incredible book of wisdom was written by this man, Yeshua, Jesus. Okay. It's just a coincidence, folks. I don't think there's anything to it because this guy, he's said to have lived before. He's said to have lived before about 180 BC. But his name's Yeshua. His name's Jesus. And he said, okay, he's translating this. My grandfather, Jesus, especially devoted himself to the reading of the Torah and the prophets and the other books of the fathers. So he acquired significant skill in these, and that everyone might, live in accordance with the Torah. Therefore, you are encouraged to read with goodwill and attention, and to do your reading with allowances made in cases where, although we worked hard in translating, we may seem to render a phrase inadequately, for what was said in Hebrew in itself does not have equal force when translated into another language. Not only this, but also the Torah itself and the prophets and the rest of the books differ not a little as originally spoken. So here, according to, again, the wisdom of Sirach, is recognized, I believe, by all Catholics and Orthodox Christians as holy and divinely inspired scripture. Catholics and Orthodox, not the Protestants. But it here recognizes that, listen, it uses a few key words. It uses a word like a power. It says that the Hebrew has a different power or a force when it's, and that might not be able to be translated. And then it says it's the difference between the original language and the translation. It's not a little. There's a large difference. So I find that just so significant as well, just to remind us all that in order for us to maybe properly understand some of the deeper teachings of the Bible, well, it's a matter of necessity, I believe. If you want to understand the truth of the God of Israel, it is, I believe, a necessary requirement to learn the Hebrew language, because I believe every prophet came of the Israelite prophets came speaking Hebrew. And it's just very significant. Even the Quran mentions that we sent all of our messengers to the people in their language. So it's specific to the language. And even the Quran says this is an Arabic Quran. You're not going to be able to, you can't translate it. You can't translate it. I don't know Arabic, but I do know Hebrew. And I've often emphasized this point extensively and will for the rest of my life. It's very important. So this is Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah. It begins tonight with the help of God. So light a candle and have some donuts or something fun. But make sure and remember that this is celebrating the reinitiation of the animal sacrificial system that existed in Jerusalem and the successful overthrow of the Greeks, and the reestablishment of God's temple. And they forcibly circumcised everybody. which is rather shocking, I would say, but nonetheless must mean something very significant to us to be included in such sacred writings. But, it's a matter of principle for some things in life. And, in terms of how Hanukkah relates to our life today, and what we should be understanding from this is that this is, in fact, what the true believers of God are called to. You could call it a type of holy war. The Torah itself says that Hawaya ish milchama Hawaya shamo, that God is a man of war. On a side note, I got initiated into a warrior society of individuals, but it wasn't really a warrior society. It was just a group of entrepreneurs and business owners and police officers and FBI agents who just wanted a separate kind of community of guys devoted to developing themselves and being better men and holding each other accountable and helping each other achieve our goals in life. But even that turned out to just be a brand, and a lot of people weren't about that life or devoted to the seriousness with which the title a man of war should be associated with. But certainly the monastic tradition of the Christians is very devoted to this, and I would say the mystical traditions of all the world's faiths take it very seriously. And the specific warfare that we're being called to is, to unfortunately have to trigger people. I don't mean to, but everyone is very worried about Islam. But Muhammad said, allegedly, and I believe a Sahih hadith, that the greatest jihad you can fight, which certainly Christians and Americans seem to be very afraid of, or at the very least uncertain and hostile towards this idea of jihad. I think that given a deeper and more holistic understanding of the principle, and to finish that hadith, Muhammad finishes and he says the greatest jihad that you can possibly undertake and fight is to speak the truth against the tyrant, which I believe Candace Owens would agree with, and I believe Tucker Carlson would agree with. Both of them fully devoted Christians, and yet the idea that the true war is the war for truth, specifically against an evil tyranny, that is biblically established. I mean, that is the Exodus. That is the Exodus, which is why the original seal of America, that was proposed within a few hours of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I believe in 1776, within a few hours, they proposed that, I believe Thomas Jefferson was one of the people, but they proposed that the seal for the country should be Moses and the Israelites on one side of the sea, and Moses lifting his hand with the fire of God displayed right in the middle, and all of the Egyptians and their entire army drowning in the sea with the words around it, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Many people may scoff at such ideas or not understand the significance of the principles contained within them, but alas, these principles were the very mamash foundation for the country. Incidentally, a lot of these young men, warrior revolutionaries, very young men who founded the country of the United States of America, they were mystics. And they were polymaths, and they spoke multiple languages, and they studied alchemy and philosophy and engineering and science, and they were very holistic people. But no doubt very spiritual people. A lot of them were Freemasons, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you look at that, because some people are terrified of Freemasons, and then some people are Freemasons. I'm not a Freemason. I've spoken to several Freemasons, and we spoke about several things, and I can talk about that another time. But I'm not a Freemason because they make you put a knife to your throat and then take an oath that if you ever reveal any of the secrets of their tradition, anything that's revealed to you by another brother, then they have the authority to cut your throat and cut out your heart and bury it in shallow sand. And I believe that's some sort of oath that's taken by people at the very beginning. And so I'm unfortunately not willing to utter such an oath, which is something I did not have to do in that other society. And I made sure that there was no type of rituals like that before I joined. But at any rate, uh, so this is how we are to understand this principle in our day and age. The founding of our own country. And what we are called to do is to speak the truth and embody the truth in our lives in a very real way. Incidentally, one of the ways we can do that is by, it's interesting, we're being subverted and we're being separated so that we can be conquered. And I've really heard a lot of just language surrounding like racism, whether it be Jews or otherwise. People are all over the place. Race is becoming a very large subject again. Now, one of the most interesting things about religion is that some of the greatest Jews were Egyptian. Some of the greatest Christians were Moroccan. Some of the greatest Muslims were Arabian. It's not about your race. And that's one of the real core principles that the New Testament, I think, does a pretty incredible job of establishing. And I think that's it's got to be one of the real influential concepts at the basis for the country, because, although slavery and discrimination was a part of the country, no doubt this country went to very extreme lengths to ensure the sovereignty of the individual, even when that was wrong, which all countries on the planet have not done. Um, and there's a lot more to that story. It's not quite, there was a lot of good people who first created this country. They're not a bunch of racist bigots. Um, and at any rate, we came together at the beginning of this country in a unity of principle, that were established in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. And that's what unites us. It's not ethnicity, whether, because the first pioneers, there were Germans, there were Irish, there were English, there's all sorts of people. And if you were to tell an Irish man that he was a German, that would be wrong. They are not the same. They're different. That's like telling a Vietnamese person that they're a Chinese, or a Pakistani that they're Indian, or I'm not sure. Some of these things may be a little more connected than others, but at any rate, it's very interesting that, religion itself teaches us this, that, Thomas Aquinas, who wasn't exactly, from the Middle East, he's an incredible Christian. Or you have, incredible Christians, incredible Muslims, incredible Jews of every background and ethnicity. Rabbi Akiva, who's one of the greatest rabbis of the entire Gemara, indisputably, he was the descendant of a convert. So, his parents were non-Jewish, I believe. So he's not blood Jew. Maybe. Or maybe it was a couple generations back or something, but he's the descendant of converts. It's not about that. Moses married a Midianite woman, Zipporah. And he was the greatest prophet who ever lived, allegedly. And so this is something that would be very good for us to learn because unfortunately, Nick Fuentes is an idiot. And I'm not sure why his political philosophy is not very sophisticated. He literally went on Dave Smith and Tucker Carlson, and he's like, I'm an identitarian. I believe that identity is existential reality, and thus it is, mamash, it's facts on the ground. And we are different races. And that's important for our political system. And it's like, okay, well, we have equal representation under the law, and our unity, according to the Constitution and according to the founders of this country, is not ethnic. It's unity of purpose, aligned in principles. That's why you can have Elon Musk be one of the most fervent, he's the richest man in the world. He can live wherever he wants, and he's an American and flourished in America and is fully devoted to the American civilization. He started his own political party called like the America Party. And he's South African. And then you've got Steve Bannon, that wonderful, kind of weird, interesting guy. He's like, send Elon Musk back to South Africa. This is America. And you have Nick Fuentes saying the same thing. You're from South Africa. This person's from France. You're not even from here. And it's like, brother, Americans weren't from here, you dipshit. Brother, how the fuck do you think this started? You think we all sprung up from the American soil? My gosh, what unites us is a common principle, a common alignment of principles that were outlined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and our belief in God, that these are God-given rights, and that the government only exists to protect them, not to infringe upon us and enslave us, like we were just under, with all these evil tyrannies throughout all of history. And so this is something that we could practically do, socially, is we could really evolve in our political understanding, which I felt like was the very beginning that we started with. We really digressed, and now we're having arguments that it's like, did you not even understand the whole founding principles of the entire system? And so I really think his political philosophy, Nick Fuentes, is utterly retarded. And I don't know, I think he's just being like the breaking of taboo that people do in order to gain followers, like Jake Paul and all these idiots. They purposefully, and Andrew Tate to an extent, they manipulate their audience by purposefully breaking taboos and saying things that are purposefully, manipulatively triggering in order to garner attention, to garner further attention, when I don't think the political philosophy or the ideas are really they're not sophisticated. They're certainly not the wisdom of the prophets of God. I mean, who the hell are these people as representatives of our culture? Why are we listening to them? I don't. I don't listen to them. And I encourage you not to listen to them. I love Rumi. Rumi said it best. I love Rumi. Rumi said it best. You're going to love this. This is actually going to be the opening for every podcast that I do on this channel. And it is, listen to the prophets, not to some adolescent boy. The foundation and the walls of the spiritual life are made of self-denials and disciplines. Stay with your friends who support you in these. Talk with them about sacred texts and how you're doing and how they're doing, and keep your practices together. Like something that I'm doing with my best friend now is we're sharing poetry together. We need to encourage this in culture and in society. We need to be virtuous. The founders said that this country was only created for a virtuous people. And one of the ways that we can do that is by, I've been struggling to give this next, episode, podcast, because it's all about Bil'am and intelligence agencies and the corruption of purity, the purposeful pollution of our people. And so, I've been writing it, but certainly this is something that we can all be doing in our society, is encourage the dissemination of the prophets and poetry. We do not ask, when it comes to questions that we have about life, how often do we ask the prophets what they would think? So many people, they know about King Solomon, but how many of us are waking up and knocking on the door of King Solomon and saying, King Solomon, I'm here, Book of Proverbs, please, will you teach me again? Teach me again. What's going on? And he is so generous to do it. God gave these prophets wisdom, and they so mercifully revealed it to the world, often to their detriment, usually killed and martyred for no reason. Holy men, completely devoted to God and the truth, in many instances. They just wouldn't bend the knee. They wouldn't bend the knee. They wouldn't bend the knee. And so may you and me not bend the knee in our own lives and choose to seek God with all of our hearts. Shalom. Happy Hanukkah. Light one candle tonight. A little halakha. Just light one candle. But then I was reading in the Gemara, and the house of Shammai said, no, start with 8 candles and work your way down. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, I don't know. I need to look into that more. Okay. Shalom. Have a wonderful life. Have a wonderful day. Happy Hanukkah. And shalom.